Folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. My phone says 6:31, so with that, I'll call the meeting to order and ask Mary to please call the roll.
Burnett, Carter, Neal,
Here.
Pasalacqua, Patterson, Paul, Smeltzer, Thorsland,
Here.
Yukon.
Here. All right, that's a majority of the task force is here, so we're good to go. First thing is the agenda was shared out, it was posted, etc. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? I've got a motion. Is there a second? I've got a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We've got the agenda approved. Okay, also sent out and posted was our minutes from October 26th. Do I have a motion to approve those? I've got a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, anybody all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, we've approved the minutes. Public participation. We have one person with us tonight, which we really appreciate the engagement of the community, Jason Young. So Jason, step up there, and I think if you push the button in the kind of the middle, it'll turn red, and that's when you know you got it.
Thank you very much. My name is Jason Young. I'm the new Director of Marketing and Sales for Volo Internet and Tech. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to address this task force and introduce myself along with our shared vision of what we feel will definitely support this project and endeavor. We have a strong desire to assist in the rural expansion of fiber networks throughout the central Illinois area, as well as obviously Champaign County. Our recent scale-up of qualified construction and installers has us positioned to finish ongoing projects, but also expand fiber to projects that we feel will closely align with this task force goals and endeavors. So we just wanted to go on record and say we appreciate their inclusion, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Jason. We really appreciate it. And like I said, we appreciate the public's participation, and especially a provider company out there that is monitoring things and looking at what we're doing and has an interest in the outcome of our project here. So with that, I'm going to ask Darlene Kleppel to do a brief staff introduction under communications of who else is here from a staff perspective.
Okay, so probably most of you have not yet one of our new grant writers. I just wanted to introduce her tonight. This is Mary Ellen Wellner. She is the retired former director of the Forest Preserve, and she is now doing grant writing for us if we can find things that we would like her to be interested in. So this is one of the projects that's possible that we might want to do some grants for. So she's here tonight to hear what's being said, and I just wanted to introduce her while she's here. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
Good to see you, Mary Ellen, and thank you, Darlene. Appreciate that. So with that, we're going to move right into the heart of the meeting tonight, which is each of us received the draft report from Finley and along with CCG in conjunction with CCG. And with us tonight is Sean Middleton to talk a little bit and kind of walk us through things a little bit of what that report is, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards with him. So Sean, it's all yours.
Good. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time and the effort everybody's put into bringing this all together. I know from our standpoint, we're very pleased, and I'm expressing that from both Finley and CCG Consulting, which we did as a co-effort on this project. But really, I think what we want to do is just, in lieu of time, the report's extensive, and that really, each report is very uniquely tailored. I can tell you that. We've done a number of these, and we've done partnering with CCG every time. And if you've read through, you'll acknowledge the fact that we really like to tailor that for the person or the entity that we're working towards. And so, obviously, we're not going to be able to summarize that lengthy thing, and we're going to be hitting the highlights as best we can tonight. And if anything, we want to be able to bring that to a head and allow for good conversation and other. So I apologize. I'll learn characteristics with your microphone here as we move along. But so, do you want to take questions at the end, Brad, or how do you? Okay. Very
Why
good.
don't you go ahead and talk, and then we'll kind of finish up at the end with your discussion.
Very good. Very good. Okay, well, I am not a slide reader, so just so you know, we've got a lot of good detail, and I'm going to note here that since he was not able to be with us, Doug Dawson, who's the principal author of the final written report, also prepared the presentation as well, but we've talked extensively, so I'm going to be bringing some of that, and as I refer to it, obviously it's the detail that he used from our design efforts at Finley Engineering, that is our forte, and his abilities, what he's done with the feasibility work. But our scope, as you guys are, it's very obvious here, you know, and from your RFP, we want to be able to give you an actionable, non-dust collecting report. That was the intent of what we were trying to do, is to give you something that truly had the right mechanism for you to be able to make next steps and be able to do that in an intelligent fashion. So ultimately, trying to help you solve those digital inequalities, other barriers. Many of those are also summarized and talked about in the report in more, much more detail. But to give you truly the details you need to be able to think about what those next steps are and weigh all the opportunities in front of you. So from that, then, obviously the grants are what's driving everything for everyone in our industry today. And I know that's going to be a big part of the discussion, to see how those play in, both what's current and what we know is coming, and how the rules of the road are going to be hitting for especially the infrastructure funding that's coming as part of this. So as Doug kind of notes there in the final bullet, what are we trying to do with this report? We're trying to give you details. Thank you. Very good. Trying to give you information that can be used for elected officials, allow the broadband issues at large to be detailed, and have the framework for you to figure out what your next steps are. So, and we're going to refer back to this, but the study of our area, of course, was pretty much to take the county and pull Champaign-Urbana greater out. So what we're referring to as the entire study area is the rural area outside of those two urban population centers. And you'll see we did create 3 splits that we focused our study effort on. One would be as if we took everything outside of Champaign-Urbana, and you'll see that reflected. Then we took one further where we pulled the bigger rural towns out. So we call that our rural option, if you want to refer to it that way. The third option is where we took, and for those of you that aren't familiar, RDOF is the acronym for the federal funding that has went through very recently. Many entities won that in a nationwide capacity. There are people that won funding for areas in Champaign County, but they, as of yet, have not acquired those funds. So there's some question as to will they build or will they not, but it has to be factored into the calculation of what you guys could do going forward. So that's why we include it in the study. So you'll see that too. We've given you detail. So we did obviously do a little bit of a lay of the land research bit on existing internet service providers, ISPs, that you guys have in the county today. And I don't need to step through other than to note that the providers you have today fall into a couple of different categories. Your incumbent DSL type providers like AT&T Frontier, been around for quite a while, and Doug noted there very explicitly that according to regulation, or AT&T has announced they're not connecting new DSL really nationwide. So that's just an important bullet. Of course, you've got your 2 cable providers in the county, both Comcast and Mediacom. Just to note that they happen to be in the bigger rural towns is where their footprint happens to be. Several fiber overbuilders in the county. What I mean by that, somebody putting new fiber optic cables over an existing area, trying to actually build new infrastructure. I3 Broadband and the CCG, Campus Communication Group. And there are a number of wireless providers, including one that spoke tonight, that we note have various footprints encompassing many parts of the county in the rural areas and varying speeds. And we do have detail to support what we've researched from that. And you do have a couple of satellite or even cellular providers. They're much less penetration, so obviously they're included, but we do note that. So just to make a quick bullet on RDOF, And for those of you that aren't familiar with this, again, that funding, it was a reverse auction conducted by the FCC. People sought funding. And ultimately what it boils down is they had several years to be able to take advantage of this funds. They're still in the middle of this. And not all providers have actually acquired their funds. Champaign County is one of those areas. The providers that won RDOF funding in your area, and we note them, and you can read much more detail in the report, none of them have started building in Champaign County today. They had a window where they could build, it was like 3 to 5 years, Tim, something like that. So knowing that was just a year or so ago, many of these people haven't even touched their areas. One of the contentious points that's happened at the federal level is that some of these people can allow, there's a percentage they don't have to build everywhere, and they can allow some of their areas to go back. And nobody knows when they're going to do it or what areas they're going to decide not to build. But the fact that they've obligated parts of your area with that puts in line a question on what you can do to secure new federal funds until they've decided if they're going to build in your area. And that's why it's a big deal. So we note that, and it's a big part of our study, that we wanted to make sure you're fully informed. You've got some providers here that won funding but haven't actually accepted it to start building yet. So that's just an important point. So that's what that looks like. That kind of gives you a geographic. If you see my map here, there's Champaign County boundary, and the blue shaded, and there's a little bit of pink. It's just up by Rantoul and Mahomet, and then there's those little bit of red around Champaign. Are the 3 providers that accepted, and it looks like that. That's the footprint where they've accepted the potential for federal funds, haven't done anything with it yet. Now, this is what future speeds with RDOF could look like if that happened, and you can see some color shadings. Basically, we can talk more at length about broadband speeds, but 100 by 20 is the newest definition of what true broadband is supposed to be. Some people may say, well, that'd be great. I don't even have 25, let alone 15 at home, download speed. But this is what the demographic looks like in Champaign County today, based on what those delineations are.
What's the tan color?
What's that?
Like in Champaign-Urbana, and you see on like Rantoul, it's tan. Is this all color coded? But that's
Yeah,
is that what
it's not part of that. Really, you're seeing more, the tan is not, it's really the streets. So the coverage is, they didn't receive RDOF funding inside any of those urban areas at all. So that's why you don't see any of the other color gradients.
So
there.
it's just unmapped.
Yeah, pretty much unmapped. That's
Okay.
exactly right. Exactly right. The intent of the RDOF auction was to go after what they consider to be high-cost service areas, more rural, unserved, underserved, so they didn't have any blocks allocated for in urban areas.
The 120, is that something from the FCC? You said the new standard, is that FCC or?
According to many, now granted, like an RDOF auction, they did have a tier at 25.3, but the newer definitions that the FCC is trying, you want to take it? Go ahead.
And for the benefit of the task force, I'm Tim Arbeiter with Finley. I'm the director of broadband consulting for the group. Prior to me joining Finley, I was actually the state of Missouri broadband director under our state government. So to answer your question, the definition is actually through the new federal funding guidelines that have come out through the U.S. Treasury. So ARPA, the state and local fiscal recovery funds. So those guidelines called for, technically actually called for the gold standard, which is 100 by 100 symmetrical. The fallback was 100 by 20. And so you see this line of 100 by 20 as kind of the minimum of served. FCC has yet to update its definitions to this new standard, but I think there's enough momentum going down this hill that we're going to see them do this in the near future. So,
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim, very much. Okay. So one thing that we did do as part of this, many of you on the task force are familiar, Doug Dawson's group at CCG did an extensive market outreach of the members in Champaign County, various surveys with both residential and businesses. Some very interesting takeaways if you haven't read the report. We also did speed tests and did interviews with key stakeholders. That was a very enlightening part of our effort. And Here's just a quick summary slide of the highlights, if you will, of some of the things we found. Some of these aren't a surprise. Some were a bit of a surprise. 10% don't have any broadband in Champaign County rural areas. That was interesting. Now, it should not surprise us, but 70% of respondents, at least someone working from home. That's amazing to me. I mean, I hadn't tracked a statistic like that. I mean, it sounds very plausible. 19% have a full-time working from home person, and that's in Champaign County today. Amazing that there's already that much penetration with the level of broadband we have. So pretty amazing to see where people are going. But 14% still struggling to even get a cell service at home and see what they can do with that. Your broadband prices being at 68 average is not bad. That tracks with federal. So that's good. You're not out of sorts on that one. But the next slide is very interesting. Out of our survey detail, 73% would support building a new fiber network in this county, in those rural areas, and 26% might support it, but want to know more detail. I mean, do the math on that. That's the majority of people have a impetus or are interested in something like that.
But was the survey question, you will support it or you will support it with your wallet?
Yeah. Trying to find correct. Yeah, they might want it, but what is it going to take or what is it going to cost? Now, that's still a great point. So the idea is there, I guess, if you want to refer to it that way. Good point. 46% would buy from a new fiber network. 31% probably would. So interesting, just side notes that came from that detail. The business surveys were also very enlightening, and only, number of talking about the service levels today in order to run their businesses, some occasional problems. That was a great interview evidently we had with one of the local realtors talking about having trouble even selling houses if they can't have good broadband as part of the deal. I thought that was a good one. Another one that actually Doug Dawson was very impressed with Champaign County, and he and I had an extensive discussion on this one, at the level of sophistication that the farming community possess in this county. He talked extensively with some very tech-savvy farmers in your area, and yet were frustrated because they were struggling to get the new technology they were adopting from their vendors to work right because of the broadband that they were looking to utilize. So that was just it was a really interesting one, and you can read more detail in the report if you'd like to see that. But here are some speed tests. This is actually the survey data that we incurred. Pretty typical for those types, both a DSL or a cable, the average speeds that people were able to obtain, and satellite, other things like that. So that wasn't, that was pretty par for the course, that the speeds were pretty average for what they were able to showcase. Okay, so I will take a moment. I don't want to get into great detail, but of what a network design for these areas would look like. And so this is just what was considered in order to do this kind of thing. Looking at, if you're going to make an investment, you want it to have the longest life potential available, do the most bang for the buck, and yet accomplish all the goals of everybody looking for it, thinking about the uses, all those kinds of things. One thing that the RFP asked, Doug does a nice job of noting here for us, that we were to consider technologies and close those broadband gaps. So based on that, looking at spending dollars on new wireless was not determined to be the best fit for today based on how many wireless providers are currently in the county. Here's a consideration that if you were going to take ARPA or other funding, want to look for new broadband, would you do fiber or broadband? Finley and CCG came to the conclusion that if you were going to spend dollars, we would recommend a fiber network for these areas, mainly because you have so many wireless providers today using up a lot of the available spectrum that it's not just a matter of getting money and trying to buy radios and find towers to put them on. The challenge would be operating at the speeds you need to meet the definition of broadbands in a wide area. So it becomes a real technical challenge. So our suggestion was to do a fiber build, and that is what we've proposed. What it would look like, how it would take, if we did all the rural areas, you can see there, it would take almost 2,000 miles a fiber build to get to everywhere outside of Champaign-Urbana to serve every resident in the county. And you can see the couple of the other ones that we noted there. Got a fun slide there on, I could explain if you want to understand what we consider a PON, which is passive optical network design. All it means is we've learned through industry standards and our experience in doing this that when you build a fiber network, you try to use the glass the best way you can. So we actually don't put active powered electronics out in the field. It's passive. You split the light. So you light up the light at what they call the central office. You send it out, and it gets split passively until it makes it to every single consumer out there. And so we're just showing you how the glass makes it to every home, and we split the light in such a way that it's a very efficient design. But this is what most people use today that are doing design kind of like this. So I'm just giving you that detail. I can go into more detail if you want to, but what we call passive optical network. But it is designed for what we would consider to be true technology, current industry standard. This would be 10 gig consideration to each consumer potential, depending on what an entity would want to provide. True gigabit capability with today's technology. That's what we proposed. I'm just going to step through here. I've kind of talked about that. And it also, as we're doing design, as we do for any community or area that we're laying out, we're allowing for redundancy. You don't build a fiber network today and not allow for a fiber cut to take out the whole network. We've allowed for a loop topology so that one cut doesn't take everybody out, part of our design. And growth expansion potential. We've put extra glass into the design, so if new areas expand in the county, new builds, new subdivisions, new whatever, this is already designed to handle that and scale. That's kind of what it looks like, and it's hard to see. The red doesn't hold type very well on the print, but we've split the county into about 6 serving areas, and that's just population density. That's how we would logically split it in order to get to every consumer. So we just show you what that looks like, the kind of design. And as we're serving out to each individual consumer, we use the fibers the most efficiently we can. If you can imagine that, we start off with bigger fibers when it leaves the central office, and they get fewer and fewer as we make it out into the neighborhoods. So that's just how we would typically design. That just kind of shows you what that looks like laid out on the different neighborhoods to make sure every consumer has an option. Here's what a subdivision might look like. And the color shading is a little hard to see up there on the map, but color codes are based on the sizes of cables and how it makes it to every single consumer. So here's the bottom line slide if you want to take the step to it. Again, the 3 areas that we defined for the county, what we call whole area, is the total cost to build fiber to the home, fiber to the premises, for everybody that's outside of Champaign-Urbana. So that's what we're calling whole area, the entire county minus Champaign-Urbana city. Total rural would be excluding the bigger rural communities. And then no RDOF would be basically taking that total rural area and removing those RDOF potential funded zones that I showed you in that early map. And that's what will be left over. If the potential happens that you can't secure federal funds, then that would be what you would be left over, still needing service potential. So we've shown you all 3 just in case. And you can see the total dollars it takes to build that kind of infrastructure. And we kind of note there below, cost per passing. That's a very important number. And one thing I'll note, if you're not familiar with these numbers from the industry, the rural and non-RDOF area that at 10 or 11,000 per passing are pretty typical. And what I want to note, and you'll see it in the next 2 slides, building the whole area, obviously it's a lot bigger piece to bite off. It's a lot more area. But the cost comes down considerably per passing, and that's basically subsidy. Your bigger rural towns are subsidizing those more disparate rural builds. And you can see the numbers right there. And I can actually show it to you because we broke it down as if you were going to secure grant funding to do each of those 3 builds. So I'm going to show you a slide for each one. The 3 scenarios I just gave you, we're going to look at each one. This is what that whole area build looks like. So what it means is, based on that density and the potential subsidy, you don't need near as much grants. That's the percent of assets would be what you would be seeking in a potential grant, let's say. And there's some penetration numbers. How many consumers are actually going to take it if you build it? So we've done some speculation there based on our industry standards. And you can see there not as much, there's not even in that 45 to 70% take rate, and that's kind of initial and maybe long term, no grant needed because of the densities. Actually, the consumers alone, the density of consumers would pay for the infrastructure build. So that's pretty amazing. So if you want to see now as a contrast, let me show you. I'll step to one and we'll step to the other. Here's that rural area one. Now the picture looks much different because you've lost the density of the more rural, urban towns in the rural areas. Notice you're going to need, if you have a lower take rate, you're needing 58% in grants to cover the cost of that kind of construction level. And if I step you to the next one, just to show you the contrast, if you pull the RDOF areas out too, it's even a much higher grant potential needed in order to make that a feasible case. And Doug makes that note. If there's a potential for partnering with an internet service provider, they all want to make money. So going into this kind of proposition, there's got to be a mechanism that showcases to them. It's why going after grants becomes such an important part of this discussion. It's what we help clients do all the time. They don't just go up and say, give me the price tag, and they write the check. It's what can we go for in grant funding to help facilitate this thing, and how do the financials work out? So we're trying to showcase that for you then. Much more detail in the report if you want to see this much more granular. Other variables, the only thing, there's a whole paragraph, a section on sensitivity analysis. And it is important to note that things can truly fine-tune this and have a swinging impact based on how things work. What you could acquire for your own bond funding, Doug Dawson goes into a lot of detail about potential bond funds that could be available to a county and other in the report, if you read that. And so tweaking the interest rates or the term or even the cost of the build by some efficiencies could substantially affect some of these variables. So just want to note that. Tim, you might want to talk about grant funding.
I know nothing about that. All right, so, grant funding, we all know of, the current ARPA allocations through the state and local fiscal recovery funds. In addition, what is now happening with the U.S. Department of Commerce through NTIA. If you're not familiar with this office within the U.S. Department of Commerce, it's the National Telecommunications Information Administration. So now you know why they're called NTIA. They are the agency that is in charge of writing the rules and regs and guidelines from Congress on this $42.5 billion that will come to the states. So the states have they have to get organized. They have to have a plan in place to show the U.S. Department of Commerce before they can get their first tranche. This is also contingent on the Federal Communications Commission publishing the new maps. And so back to the question about the speed definitions, I would imagine that the FCC is going to update that definition prior to the new maps being published. But that money won't flow until the FCC publishes its maps and a formulary can be designed. So that $42.5 billion, Illinois would receive an allocation of that of sorts. There's projections of what that could be, but until the new maps are published by the FCC, it's just conjecture at this point in time. And so, but know that there is additional funds from the federal government coming to Illinois through the infrastructure bill, which is also known as IIJA. So that's that piece. That was a $65 billion total fund, 42.5 just for broadband, 65 billion total. So 42.5 is going to come to the states. The other remaining dollars are going to stay in DC and hosted grant competitive rounds through NTIA for middle mile programs, and also digital literacy and digital education and affordability programs are actually also going to be managed, and that will also have a component that will come to the states. So there's some other fundings that's going to stay with NTIA.
Are you confident that the county can use its ARPA funds as local matching dollars against these new funds? For a while, they were specific, the federal government was saying, if you're using ARPA funds, that's fine, go use them, but you can't use them as the local match for another federal grant.
It's our assumption right now that they will be, but we won't know officially until the summer when they drop the regs on it. They're anticipated to release those. The official date is May 16th. That's what they're driving towards to get those published. My hunch is they'll probably drop in June sometime, but they have actually a weekly webinar series through NTIA. But yeah, that will actually have that delineation, that line item of what the match can and cannot be. So our anticipation is that it would be allowable. So now, we can't say that for sure until we see what's called a NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, but they will drop that sometime this summer, and that'll be for all of the broadband IIJA programs, not just one over the other. They will all drop at once, which is a fun time in DC. So, but yes, I mean, that we're waiting eagerly for that, really that determination of what can and cannot be done.
Because that's a real game changer for the county.
Yes,
If
it is.
the county can't use it as ARPA funds against the BEAM funds, then this doesn't work.
Right.
Now,
Well-
there's other funding that's currently available through the state, however,
That's correct.
that we know the ARPA funds can be used against, and they just dropped their round 3 funding opportunity.
They did.
Can all of this be put into a state thing before this new thing happens in May or June?
And I think you're going to see evolutions of programs. So let me address that in two different ways. First way is, I mean, we're helping a client just south of here with their Connect Illinois grant request. So we're going through that right now. We're knee deep in all the rules and regs of what the Illinois Broadband Grant Office is asking for. And I do applaud the state of Illinois. I mean, they took their ARPA funds and combined it with the Illinois Bond Fund to create a $350 million. And for the most part, I mean, I congratulate them. It's a fairly flexible program. And to have a menu of options that you can do from the actual build the broadband to homes, but then they also have the broadband access, which is the digital literacy and adoption for urban areas. And then they have an innovation fund, you know, for those people who are entrepreneurs and want to pitch, you know, innovative ideas. So I applaud the state from that standpoint. Let me, you know, maybe shift gears a little bit. When I was the state director for Missouri, I will tell you, we initiated our state grant off of our state statute, and we just evolved that when CARES hit to meet all the CARES requirements. So we just evolved that program. Then came ARPA, and so we were like, okay, so let's watch what NTIA is doing, and then we incorporated what they did into our evolution of our program. So I would say through Connect Illinois, I would imagine that Mr. Schmidt has pretty much everything kind of buttoned up that's going to be nice and ready for BEAD. So as you learn the state program, you're probably not going to see a ton of tweaks. You will, based on, you know, what we learned from grant programs and what you should and shouldn't do. When you take your lumps, you adjust it for the next program. So I think you're going to see through Connect Illinois that it's just going to evolve a little bit more. And if BEAD actually has a little bit of a higher bar, that'll be incorporated in the state document. So, but I applaud Illinois. The program is well designed and very easy to read and easy to understand. So.
Very good. Sorry, I got off track. No, that's wonderful. I mean, that's the whole point, just trying to answer questions. Really, so we're probably just about done. So they're just what we consider to be a wrap of the highlights of what we're giving here is to then talk a bit about strategy based on what we've presented to you or created with this work. One, which none of us can really know what to do with, is these RDOF areas. We don't know what these providers are going to do. And the federal government doesn't have a direction yet on how they're going to deal with this. Basically, if they don't build the areas, the money for them goes back in the kitty and they're up for grabs, and you can seek federal funding on your own for those. So then they are fully available to just go for. But there's some time for those providers to make that decision. And but they are the ones that decide unless the FCC imposes some mandate to force things to come to a head. So that's a big one. Now here's a question. Doug posed this question. It's a really good one to think about. Here we've proposed fiber to the county as the best fit based on the topology of what's there, the lay of the land, existing providers, all that. But if the FCC does award some RDOF funding to a wireless provider, would the county consider partnering with that as a way to help serve? There's an interesting strategic consideration. Another one, what is the county willing to help fund as a solution? How much and in what manner? And there's a lot of scenarios brought about in the report where we talk about how you could go it alone and be your own internet service provider as the county. You could partner with a single ISP, internet service provider. You could partner with several. So there's a lot of different strategic considerations. The biggest one is trying to find that role, whether it's a partner or what other kind of grants can then be just what we're talking about. How many can you then stack together, so to speak, in order to seek for the same group of consumers and make this a much more financially viable proposition going forward? So there's some interesting strategic questions, and then we address this, which is really what we think of as next steps if we are looking through your eyes, to, so to speak, from the efforts we've done this with other counties and municipalities, others just like you. What do we see as a next step? And I can tell you, one is what we've defined there, staffing. There's a nice section in the report talking about how finding a local champion, maybe within the county board, maybe within the task force, maybe within the local economic development groups, someone that can help keep momentum moving forward, keep their eye on the prize. That's a critical piece. We see that time and again. Having someone that is a catalyst is very important. Another big one is to be in discussion with ISPs that could be potential partners and know their interest, their desires, what their next steps plans are themselves, what's their roadmap look like for the county in this area, your constituents. But talking to them early rather than later, and then seeing whether it's informal or if it's formal. RFP process. We do that all the time where we help organize the effort for talking to these ISPs in order to define the steps and see so that you have a better action plan on how it should look. You got one there, go for it.
And again, we primarily are talking about infrastructure in this space, but on this point in particular on ISPs, and again, it wasn't a part of the scope, but it is something to acknowledge when you talk about a broadband task force like this. Many of your current ISPs are enrolled in the affordable program for those areas of the county that have families of need who struggle to connect when they have infrastructure. Your big four that are here are enrolled in the Federal Communications Commission's program called ACP, American Connectivity Program, which provides $30 a month. And forgive me, you may have had them at your task force already and they've given you a report or a briefing, but if it's been a few months, it might be a chance to invite them back to see how enrollment is going for their ACP program, because sometimes word of mouth is the best form of advertising. You know, no matter how much social media you put out there or TV ads, people just sometimes don't pay attention that there's actually a benefit. And it actually crossed the hurdle. It was funded with federal funds and between CARES and ARPA, but then with the IIJA, the infrastructure bill, they put a very large down payment for that program to keep going, which was a huge sign from Congress that they were keeping that alive for a very long time. So that's $30 a month to an eligible household. So in addition to ISPs about infrastructure, if you're going to talk to them and bring them in this forum, also talk to them about adoption and how they're doing with their enrollments, because the more take rate they can get where they currently exist, and if they're enrolled in the ACP, that can only help them get them more interested about what they could do outside of their current footprint. And if they're not, that's okay. You at least know that they're not interested in expanding infrastructure, but they certainly could use the help, especially for our families of need who maybe are not, again, they're not connected. So they may not know except for the TV or their cell phone just a way to raise awareness. And that's where I think a county task force like this can help, elevate the message, if you will. And it's at no cost to the companies, and that helps them help you. So anyway, a little bit of a sidebar about affordability and what that can bring.
Do you want to take community outreach?
That's a great segue. In addition to community outreach, and this is probably one of the things that when you look at bullet number 3 and bullet number 4 with community outreach, statistically valid surveys, that was a noted thing in a report that Doug provided, which was because of, just shy of participation, both, on surveys and on, speed tests, we found that it wasn't statistically valid because we didn't get enough. So as you look at the next phase, I think closing that gap and getting them to be statistically valid, it's great that we have a grant writer in the room. She knows what this means. When you can present in your narratives that you actually have, one, a community outreach survey, you interviewed your stakeholders, you speed tested your stakeholders, that's 3 prongs of community engagement. But without that statistically valid, if you have a large monetary request, that statistically valid allows for that to be considered even heavily more because you can cross-represent that with your population. So just know that piece as you look to the future. And then the other thing as you look to community outreach, I know some communities, regions, and even states have, roundtable discussions and they move it throughout the area or the county in this case, just to have listening sessions. So it could be an opportunity for this group to go talk to Big Brothers Big Sisters or the United Way, have a sit down with some folks that maybe just don't have quite the time or don't have the access, go to them. That could be a way to engage them, if you will. And then the other thing is as you move forward with the county board and with yourselves, making sure that you're spreading the message of what you're doing. You never want to surprise anybody what you're doing, especially if you have a large grant ask, or if you're considering a bonding scenario, or you're getting into a contractual relationship with 1, 2, or 3 ISPs. Nobody wants to be surprised. It can derail your efforts if you don't do some community outreach. So
That's perfect. And that the only other bullet we had is, what policies do you have at the county level that make it more favorable for people to want to do this? And it is something, if you haven't reviewed that, what does that look like within your own existing infrastructure or documentation and rulemaking? What does that look like? Are you not just incentivizing, but you don't want to have a barrier that would be prohibiting people from wanting to do that kind of thing. So go ahead, go for it.
Just with the local fiber policies, just think about the administrative pieces that it takes to do a construction project, permitting, easements, filing fees, any typical construction project that happens in the county, kind of run through that short list of items. Are any of these things that we can be more palatable on or more flexible on? If the answer is no, that's okay. That's quite all right. But if the answer is yes, then what is that yes? What does that look like? Well, maybe we can waive the filing fee for our internet service providers when they're trying to record easements, whatever it may be. Those little things actually mean a lot to folks when they're actually putting the whole construction budget together. So, yep.
So what do the barriers look like in Champaign County?
I'm sorry?
So you're talking about making sure that we have like palatable barriers. What does the environment look like in Champaign County to do this construction as far as red tape or?
Yeah, and that's something that's probably not in our scope of looking at. And so, one of the things I would ask, probably even county staff is to look at what those are for the construction projects and just document them and just have them a part of the debate. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things that would happen as part of construction, but I guess we're not privy to what the county rulemaking looks like today that would possibly prohibit. I think the point here is we've seen this come up, and I don't like to use the term, but bite an entity where somebody that sees it as unfavorable, that it's part of that discussion is if you're trying to incent those that are trying to build and increase capacity and connectivity, it's better to be proactively looking at what your rulemaking looks like rather than wait till something's an issue and they've already went down the road and you've lost a potential partner that may want to build. So that's kind of, does that make sense?
Did I read correctly here that for the purposes of this study, you feel like fiber all the way from point A to point B is the best?
That was our assessment, yes.
And you considered all the easements and the miles and all that things, and you weighed that against maybe tower to last mile fiber or something like that?
Yes, we did. And this was a very extensive, it really comes down to, there's a couple different things here. They analyzed this. We actually had team members that came out on site, and this wasn't just a desktop survey. We had staff members from a couple of our offices from Finley come out and drive quite a bit of Champaign County and make some assessments and some judgments. And here's a couple things that came out from that is, one that's a very critical piece, and actually I have experience at I've been at Finley a little over 2 years, but I actually was I should have noted that, my background. I was at a electric cooperative in Illinois for a little over 23 years, and I was a manager of engineering IT, and I built both wireless and fiber networks. So I've done some of this stuff, and now I consult with Finley and I help people figure out how to do it. So that's my piece in this role. But one of the things with wireless that becomes a consideration, and they spend a lot of time here, is the spectrum, the frequency spectrum needed to do a good job and meet, because if you're going to pull grant funding, when you look at some of these different tiers and categories, if you're only going to do 25 meg down, you don't get near the potential of scoring as you would if you're going to do 100 meg. Okay, that makes sense. But the problem is when you go for 100 meg wireless, the technology today needed to do consistent 100 by 20 wireless over a wide area with a lot of density means you need a lot of spectrum, frequency spectrum. And there's a number of providers already in the county using a bunch of the spectrum that you would need in order to do that correctly. That was a big part of our judgment as to why we believe it would be a better build if you're going to acquire grant funding to go in with fiber with what you're doing. The other is you're pretty flat, good digging dirt ground around here, which means a lot of more congested urban areas, if they're going to put it underground, for instance, they have to bore. If you're familiar with directional boring, it's very expensive, but you don't disturb much. When you can just go along the side of the field for miles and miles, plowing cable in, it is very reasonable from a build perspective. So that's another judgment. The other is the other option is to put it aerially. So put it on existing utility poles, stuff like that. And we've done that all the time. Utility operators, so here's the consideration on that. If the poles are not up to code, meaning they've been there for a long time, and there's not enough room to have the power lines at the top and the communication cable below and still make standards so the John Deere can get underneath. If you understand what I'm saying, it has to be, there's costs, it's called make ready, where poles have to be replaced, things have to be revamped, and that can be quite considerable in cost. And so we weigh a lot of those things when we look at builds. And that's why the number of these factors is why when we looked at the county and the areas you're looking at and the potential for grabbing grant dollars to do it, we think this was probably the best fit.
And then one of your bullet points in the beginning was the longevity of the system. An aerial cable versus a buried cable and a repair of a buried cable, should it be cut and all that type of stuff. Where are we at with that? I mean, fiber's not too terrible to splice, but if you got to dig it up again, right. And then what's the degradation from UV or the wind or the trees and all that good stuff? Yeah,
that's a great point. Believe it or not, you can weigh that either way, and I've been involved in building both. And they have fiber in place that's been in place since the 60s. That's still in operation today out in New England. That was some of the first cables. So the jacketing they put on fiber today is very. They claim if you put in fiber assets, most entities that are financing would call it a 25-year depreciation asset life. Not even a question. 25 to 30 year. Most people say it could last 30, 40, 50. That's most of your cost is getting the glass somewhere, whether you bury it or put it aerially. Because here's the thing, lighting up the fiber, which is the light source, which we refer to as electronics, is the very inexpensive part of this. And if the electronics changes in the next 5 to 10 years, changing a light source out and a receiver on the other end is very cheap compared to having to replace glass for miles. So that's one point I'd make. And then to your point about aerial versus underground, you're correct. There are trade-offs both ways. You bury it, and then typically you don't dig into it too often. So it's very storm hardened. Trees aren't going to take the line down and knock it over, so that's a huge benefit. Obviously, the backhoe could be a concern for it, but that doesn't happen as much of an issue. And that is why I did note this. When we design these networks, we do put in what we refer to as loop topology. We make things loop so that one big dig in doesn't cut everybody out. And we're very methodical about how we do that. So, but I would argue that the aerial fiber they've come a long way on building aerial assets. They put Kevlar reinforcing in these cables. I've seen a pole break off and the fiber cable kept the pole in the air. So
Is the glass sensitive to water like old voice copper was and so forth? Or if the jacket gets penetrated, does it have to stay dry?
water. Here's the interesting thing with the build. I love technical stuff, so I could talk. So I have to tone myself back. Sorry, I get into the detail. They put there's a technical term for what it's called. People have thought that through, and they put a chemical. They have a term for it called a icky pick, or it's a sticky chemical. It's like a goo that they inject into the cable in between all the members, and if you ever have a water intrusion, it can't get anywhere. Amazingly, that's just how they're building cables.
So like the phone company used to use positive air pressure, and you're using that, you're filling the void.
Yep, you're filling the void, and that's
Okay.
how they do it today. And
All
so
right.
that's they've come a long way in what they build today. What's that?
I learned something new.
There you go. If you have to splice it, though, I've had to splice this cable, and you do have to clean it well because it gets all over you, but it does keep the water out. So, other questions?
So a couple questions I've got. Just to clarify, let's talk back to the speeds. The ARPA funds says, if I remember correct, 100 symmetrical, meaning 100 upload and 100 download, or scalable to it.
Mhm.
But we've also tossed out 120. So again, the absolute goal is 100 symmetrical, correct?
That's the gold standard.
For the ARPA funds,
For-
as in the final ruling.
Yep, in the final rulings, but that next sentence after that, it says where impracticable, practicable.
Then the next goal is
100 by 20 is acceptable, but you must demonstrate that it's scalable
correct.
to 100 by 100. So basically, they're saying, here's the gold standard, 100 by 100, but we are acknowledging that there may be some challenges getting 100 by 100, but the backstop would be 100 by 20 scale, but you must demonstrate scalability. So
And just so you know, so this fiber network we're proposing would be gigabit capable, symmetric, both ways.
Right, and I was just wanting to clarify, so, I mean, we toss
That's
a
great.
bunch of numbers around with speed. Our goal with this, with the ARPA, is 100 symmetrical, but there is a lower standard acceptable as long as it's scalable.
Yep.
And your service that you're talking about providing in your report is 1 gigabyte.
Correct. And which is that actually demonstrates another point why wireless was not considered, because today's wireless technology, to be scalable, many providers are struggling based on their speed test data going based on their CAF2 and RDOF funding that they've been reporting. They're struggling to get 100 by 20 with today's wireless technology on a wide scale. So proposing to go after new funds and use that is a challenge today. Some are doing it, and some have won, but now they're going to have to demonstrate it. And that's kind of back to my point on the RDOF. Some of these providers, they may get the funds, try to build it, and if they can't demonstrate it, they're going to incur penalties because they can't meet those standards.
well, and there's also additional language in the guidelines too that talks about, to the gold standard point, which is 100 by 100, is reliability, consistency, the ability to hold multiple devices within the household and each receiving consistent and reliable service. And so when you take all those words together and then you couple it with that 100 by 100, they're pointing you in that direction of, you know, that future-proof technology, that fiber, that investment that's going to carry you forward for many years to come. So,
Can I add one rebuttal to that? The only reason that that's a concern, a lot of people don't understand, we talk these speeds, but the upload, if you don't understand why the upload's important, the pandemic has taught many of us why, because to just browse the internet, download's all you need. But with the advent of the pandemic, people doing Zoom and video, and now the advent of telemedicine, where you're needing to upload videos to your doctor, those kinds of things, and children trying to do education, the upload is a deal breaker for some of these people trying to use video to do what they're doing. So by adhering to a lesser standard today, taking funding, and that's the best we can make it do technologically, we're short-changing our ability to be what's going to come out next for education and telemedicine. I don't know. I just know we read the reports all the time. People are struggling with because many providers do this where they heavily weight download because that's what affects the speed test, but uploads very little. That's why 100 by 20 sounds so out of sorts. When you put in a fiber network, we can run it full all the way out to the house, and it's not even a concern. The technology's there. That's why that's so important. So I just want to make that.
Well, I think your comments on looking towards the future are spot on. I talk to a lot of people that, you know, just anything better than 25.3, they're happy with. And my comment is, and I've said this 100 times already, we cannot be just happy with slightly better. We have to shoot for that 100 and 100 because this is once in a generation money that is probably going to happen. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and I will be gladly wrong that this type of funds will be around every few years, but I am not willing to put money on it and bet that it will be. So I think you're spot on. I think, again, 100 symmetrical sounds like a lot, and it is, but we've got to look towards the future. And if we don't shoot for that, we're selling ourselves way short on this, and we will mess up future generations of their connectivity and what we need for broadband and whatever type of commerce or communication we have in the future will be sold short.
yeah, we, on some of the projects I funded in very deep rural Missouri in the Ozarks, hills and valleys and trenches, doing fiber to the home, gigabit symmetrical, and I was seeing anywhere between $18,000 to $22,000 a passing. And they were committed. The co-op that was doing it was absolutely committed to making that connection happen. And predominantly most of their citizens in that portion of the co-op's area were just essentially low to moderate income individuals. And they're like, we have to. We're committed to getting to all of our folks in this rural portion of the co-op area. So,
Eric, you had a question, then we'll come back to you, Mike.
Yeah, a couple of them. First, I spent a lot of time reading the report. It's extensive, as you said. Some of the really good arguments you made for fiber are in there. If people want to get into the technical stuff, it's very interesting to read everything you say about, you know, the pollution we have in our spectrum right now, making it impossible. And the scaling, as you said, the glass, once it's in, you can put anything on each end of it, and you can get some pretty incredible stuff. And that's all in there, and it's very good. We talked about this RDOF. Where's my glasses? Let's see. Maybe I can read my own handwriting. The RDOF funding. If these companies do back out, we can backfill in here, correct? We will commit to backfilling in there. But you think the timeline for us knowing about what the vendors, the 3 vendors who got potentially the grant for the RDOF money, isn't going to be until later in the summer that we may know, or maybe even past that, whether they're going to actually commit to doing the work or not, because that could be a real kink, right?
Yeah.
We could get 9 months into this project and kind of really focus on the areas that aren't covered by that, and then suddenly find out we have to take care of that too.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my big concerns, that you have nothing, no power to fix until we find it out. The other is, Brad brought it up a little bit, Brad too, not Chair, is did you factor in your cost I'm sure you estimated this, and you have some experience, it sounds like. Was it Eastern Illini that you worked for? That getting things buried and getting through all the easement process can sometimes be difficult. I know that if you start running fiber down the side of the road, you're going to hit about 3,000 people's field tile. They're going to want that all fixed as it goes. Were those costs factored into your estimates?
Yeah, we'll do that, and then he'll come back to your grant one, because he's got some great analysis for that on that.
And Sean, actually, you answer that second part. I'll start off with the RDOF, and then Tim, you can finish.
Perfect. That's the way to handle it. Yes, the answer is yes. We did figure that into the cost of the build. When we figure what we consider, we'll estimate the construction cost based on what we refer to as plow rate, bore rate, and we've thought through a lot of that methodology ahead of time, and that's honestly what we use as our real. I have to respond to RFPs for Finley in a number of areas, and I lose track of how many miles of fiber we help design in a year, but I know we're over 1 million some miles of line of both copper and fiber we've done, because Finley's been in business like 1953. So a lot of those estimates were based on that kind of thing. One thing I will tell you on the easement proposition, and I know easement's a touchy one. We got Farmview and others. This is always a contentious discussion. The community engagement part becomes the critical piece for how that works. I'll be very honest. The co-op I worked for was actually Illinois Rural, which is in the west part of the state. But we addressed this issue too, and we had to step through this one in an area when we started building fiber. One is when there's existing easements, and one of them is simply, can we use the same right-of-way corridor, but we need to re-sign because it's current. When people are taking advantage and able to utilize, the acceptance rate goes way up. As opposed to absentee landowners, and they exist everywhere, and we've went around some or found alternate routes. That happens. We do know that. But let me give you an example, because take rate, we talked about take rate a little bit in our discussion. It affects the finances greatly. But let me just give you an example. When we were building a couple of our areas, we started doing the community engagement. We actually did, everybody can do whatever they want. We did pizza and ice cream giveaway and invited the community out to a tent and gave away, talked about information, what we were doing, building in the area, however you want to do that kind of community engagement. And then we had some people actually going door to door and doing some discussion work. And then Doug talks about that some in his report. There's many ways to engage the public and lots of ways we can help with that. But I'll just give you a statistic. In the 2 areas I'm thinking about that we started building, just from that pre-engagement activity, we pre-signed 30% of the group before we laid one piece of fiber in the ground. And we weren't an anomaly. That happens a lot. But when it comes to the easement acquisition part, that is huge. Having them involved in the process and not just one-off and we're creating potential, that becomes a huge part of it. There could be some, I don't want to say legislative help, but one thing I will tell you, and this is an experiential piece as well, involving council in looking at the easements. You might find that when easements got to a certain age, they did cover communications assets. Some of the early ones were electricity only, and they didn't have that coverage. They're going to have to be re-signed as new. So there's some discussion there, but obviously property rights is just a hot button issue all the way along. But if you're going to be moving forward, having that engagement is what makes the whole process work. So that'd be my quick response to that.
Eric, I would agree with that. The community engagement's critical versus the company basically stopping in your front yard the day they're there and saying, hey, we're here, we need to go across your property. We don't really have access, but we're on a schedule, and we're just going to go across anyway. I can give you an example of exactly when that happened, and I know the county sheriff was called in Champaign County to stop it because they had no authority to go across their property. So community engagement's critical with that. I do think that Doug perhaps overstated in his document maybe the ease of the easement issue, because here, at least in Champaign County, when you're talking along rural roads, The landowner owns to the middle of the road. There is no easement in the ditch. That's the farmers because they pay taxes to the middle of the road. So maybe he made that sound a little easier than what it is, because once you get off of state or federal or even some county roads, when you get on township roads, it's the landowner. You have to talk to them. And Eric's right, there will be thousands of field tile broken if you're talking 1,900 miles. My comment, Eric, on the RDOF money is there are three companies, and I was trying to look for the map in here of which one. The one that received the most money or has the most area actually has a case before ZBA right now. They're wanting to put towers up on Eastern Illini's power station because they're going wireless. So they have not received their money because they've been in my office and talked to me about the project. They've been approved but have not gotten in a single nickel yet. But their case they're moving forward because they're in front of ZBA. ELOC sent that, Eric, to ZBA a month ago to build towers to send wireless out. And they believe they'll get 100 symmetrical. Now, will they? I don't know. But I can tell you the biggest one is already moving forward. Of the three that you outlined, that one is moving forward, the one that's in blue there.
So, and partly, from a logistics standpoint on RDOF, and we watch it daily. I get the daily digest from the Federal Communications Commission. That's one thing I constantly look for. They don't do any fanfare. They, sometimes they do, but it's buried underneath their public notices where they release the next round of what they call authorized. They do ready to authorized and authorized. So for the companies, the two or the three companies that are up there, they won the area. So that starts their clock with the FCC. They actually have to submit everything, financials, technology, all of their details to prove to the FCC that they can do it before they move them to ready to authorize. Once they get to ready to authorize, then they have to get their financial backing in place before they can move to authorized. And so, for instance, these folks up here have not been authorized, so they're still under scrutiny by the FCC. And we've seen, and this has not happened before. The FCC has clamped down a lot on providers nationwide, not just in Illinois, nationwide, where they have not authorized them. They have declared them in default because they have not met the standard of what the FCC says. So we anticipate they're getting close to being done because they've been into this into going almost 2 years now. And this is the longest they've ever taken to fully review it. And I think it's to the testament of the FCC. They don't want to repeat what happened in the Connect America Fund. So they have to be getting close, maybe a couple months, maybe within weeks of being finished. So your timing of what you're doing now, I think is going to line up nicely because I think we're going to know within a few weeks, maybe a couple months, that RDOF Phase 1 is done. There's an RDOF Phase 2, but that's not going to launch until the new maps are published. So,
Eric, I'll add one more thing. The company that has their project before ZBA, they've got their poles already here. So I've seen them. I've seen pictures of their poles. They're laying there. They're ready for install. So they are waiting for ZBA and ELOC, and then they're ready to go. Mike?
I wanted to compliment you guys on your report. I thought it was massive, yes, but it was also thorough, and it covered all the things that other people on the county board and the guy on the street are going to need to know. However, on page 7, you have a typo that made me crazy. On the number of passings for residential, there's more in the RDOF area than there are in the rural-only area. And that doesn't seem possible. And I think it should be 3643 instead of 6643. Yeah, well, just a 3 got turned into a 6 when it was typed into the chart.
That's
And
the
that,
real-
that same chart also appears on page 136 with the same problem.
Thank you.
For a while, I was thinking I didn't understand your definition of what the rural areas were, because this one was bigger than the other one based on passings, and I didn't turn the page to see that at the bottom, they all added up in a way that made sense, but in terms of the residential ones, they took a funny jump at
Okay.
it.
Yep, I see. Thank you. We will,
Mike, what was that second page again? You said page 7, which I've got. What
Page 7, and then on page 136.
Thank you.
And it's really just there's a residential passings in the area without RDOF that should be 3,643.
we'll make sure it's corrected. You guys get a revised copy.
Well, I mean,
Samantha?
I definitely want to thank you guys. This was very thorough and depth in detail. I would love to see the pre-COVID numbers of homes that had internet service. Did you guys by any chance have that in comparison? Because I thought 10% of households not having internet was kind of low. But I said, well, we all went and got it when we didn't have it because of COVID. So I would have liked to see those numbers in comparison. Also, I was just wondering, should we next be looking for partner providers? Would that be our next step, like moving forward?
We think that's
Or did I say that right?
that's an incredibly important piece to be considered, because, you know, depending on, and we give you a lot of kind of scenario analysis pieces in the report about how you could do it. We've helped people, and we've seen a lot of different partnership, public-private partnership, other type of structures that could work for success, and that is a critical piece, finding the right partner. I mean, not that the county couldn't do it alone. I think Doug recommends that's a challenge for a county to go into the ISP business and do it yourself, but it's been done. But if you are going to do that, finding that key critical partner is an incredibly important piece, and definitely we outlined that as one of the next steps that should be considered.
And let me just go back to that 10% number, Samantha. Just remember that it's 10% of those who surveyed.
Oh, that's right.
So,
Okay.
but let me say this though. We can go back to the Census Bureau on the American Community Survey, and we actually can look at the census tracts inside the county on what was reported of no internet, what percentage in those census tracts, and then also no homes with no devices. There's a percentage in there too. And what will be interesting to find out is whenever they drop all of the new ACS data and compare those two, and to see what progress was made, because during that time was the census, and the census was happening during a pandemic. So this will be interesting to find out what that number is and how that looks at the ACS survey from previously. So we can get those numbers, and I'll make sure that Brad gets those. So
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Mary Ellen.
This might be kind of a chicken and egg question, but in looking at the financial summaries, the financial estimates that you all put together, which were incredibly thorough, but the amount is very much contingent on the take rate. And the grant is contingent on the take rate. But you have to apply for a grant before you know how many households actually take the service or take the service that's offered. So I'm confused at how do you determine how much grant funding to go after when you don't know what the take rate is going to be?
Yes, no, thank you. Good question. We're giving, in those kind of penetration numbers, we're giving a bit of a, not really crystal ball, but we're given those numbers based on our experience after doing this for lots of communities and lots of places. I know every place is different, and I think there's a bit of a conjecture based on the survey data as to why they picked the numbers the way they did. Doug, that's part of his methodology that he spent time on, and so we're given some estimates on penetration rates, yes, but he's also kind of looking through the survey data to say, when the people are clamoring for something different, the numbers typically reflect that the take rates get much higher. I mean, in areas we've seen, I kind of gave you that personal statistic that I watched that in my network. We were going to build, we wanted to be successful. We're like, well, how's this going to work? And we just started with the engagement before we ever did anything, and we signed 30% of the people before we put a piece of cable in the ground. That was just my story, but I've seen this all over the place. And some, hitting 60, 70%, we've seen some communities hit that after just a couple years, not 5, 10 years down the road. And so it is, we're given a bit of a conjecture, so to speak, but yeah, we're trying to base that in some evidence that we've had.
And just to follow up on that, and if the take rate ends up being, 70%, but you based your grant ask on 35%, nobody's going to come, in your experience, nobody's going to come back and say, oh my gosh, you didn't need all this grant funding. We're going to ask you to give 15 million back, please.
I think this is the acknowledgement of grant programs. Grant programs are designed, at least predominantly majority of what I've seen to date, is that you're providing access to the infrastructure. And so when you're building your pro forma models, the reviewers, the state in this case, or the federal government, NTIA, they would assume you're assuming some kind of probably conservative take rate, whether that be 40%. And so essentially, if you are wildly successful more than that, there's really no clawback. Typically, there's no clawback because you've really done your job. And I think partly the state also knows, and even NTIA knows, that this potentially is a phase one. So they want you to be successful. So when you look at phase two, well, maybe your take rate is a little higher because you were wildly successful in phase one. So maybe your grant request in phase two is a little lower because now you're at a 60% take rate, not a 40. And so I think it's realized on your future phases. So for instance, the first round of grants that I did in Missouri, I funded 16 projects. And on a survey of those projects, on average, their take rate was 42%. So again, for them, met their financial, because that's what they built a 40. But when we did CARES projects in the pandemic, their take rate was 55, 58%, in a range like that. So we saw it jump dramatically in that. And for the client that we're working to the south here, it was just based on his experience working with his area. He felt comfortable putting in a take rate of 60. So that's kind of how his financials were built. So,
Mike.
Talk here so you can hear me. If we project a 40% take rate and we end up getting 60, that's a good problem.
that's a great problem.
And it actually increases our one-time costs because we have to do more drops, we have to have more electronics. So the government's never going to get excited about their one-time money because we've had to come up with additional money that's beyond what the grant was just to get to that 60% if we base the whole grant on 40%. All the fiber in the street and all the passing all the homes, that's the same regardless of what our take rate is. It's just the drops into the buildings where we have a variable cost based on the take rate. And the revenue obviously changes based on that. But it'd be wonderful if we got to 60 and we planned for 40. And that's what probably most, 40 is probably a reasonable number, a conservative number to go forward with. But anything we get beyond 40 is a wonderful problem.
Everything you wanted to know about broadband.
Other questions? Yes, Samantha.
I just put in my notes too about the, if we can match grant funding, right, that would be awesome. So that is a go, or we'll find out for sure in May.
Okay, so currently with like the state grant, the Connect Illinois, you currently can. So for the infrastructure bill money, we'll know more this summer. We'll know officially what the ruling is. So that's what we're going to find out. That's the magic time. And so just for you, for the task force, for the county, I applaud you guys. You're going to be ahead of the game for a lot of areas, not only in your own state, but in the Midwest. You have everything at your fingertips now from a data perspective that you literally can now map yourselves into your next grant request. So
I remember in the beginning that was, definitely a topic that we wanted to find out if there was a solution to. So that's awesome. That is really awesome. Thank you.
Yes, again, Samantha, and for all of us, hypothetically, if tomorrow we could apply for Connect Illinois grant dollars using some ARPA funds with the data we have here to begin to move forward on it, because that is, we know the rules there, and we can use ARPA to match those. So, yes, we could move forward very quickly in some instances. And that 350 million is approved on a rolling average. So there are groups applying already, I'm sure, or in the process, and Finley said they were working with some groups. So there is some urgency to get that applied for sooner rather than waiting a year from now. 1 second, Mike. MC, you're up.
Thank you, sir. Couldn't find it in the report, but I know there was something in here about reaching out to the local ISPs first and trying to get some partnerships going with them, and if that didn't work, then start expanding outwards. So if we can't find any local ISPs for the fiber option, I know that there were a multitude of reasons that you were recommending fiber instead of wireless. One of them was spectrum. So if one of these ISPs that have wireless spectrum say, hey, we want to partner with you, then you would be able to use the wireless spectrum that we have licensed. Would that change your guys? Would you say, oh, that might be a feasible route to take, or would it still be, hey, fiber is still the way to go?
No, that's very perceptive of you, and we did make that note. I think I kind of called out, especially if a wireless provider that pulled RDOF funds for your area, and I think I made that note in there that that would be a very strategic play on your part to say, hey, they've pulled RDOF. Would that be a good partner option? Because now they do have funds that they've secured that are ready to spend in this area. And you're right, when they're holding spectrum, not having to acquire new, that could be a game changer for that potential, and maybe for the areas that they're able to do that in. So yeah, that's definitely an option.
If we were considering that, again, I know we're in a condensed time frame with and I know there's a question of, is 100 possible with wireless? Is that something that you're like, hey, try to wait on those RDOF ISPs that are going to roll out and try to see if those numbers ring true? Or is that something that we should say, hey, we don't have time to get any real world data? You're going to have to just, put your faith in them.
There are data sets out there today, and there are entities that are seeking funding. Some sought funding for gigabit wireless, and technologically, that's even a bigger leap. It is possible. There is wireless technology that works gigabit, believe it or not, but the problem is scaling it. And with an area that, like, there's technologies today, I experiment, I put in some equipment that does that. It's very high frequency, and it usually works over a couple miles. And then how do you put 30 people in a footprint on that tower and make that work on a consistent basis? So there are people, I would say this, people are reporting their data to the FCC now on what they're able to do, and people that have sought funds have an obligation to make speed test requirements. So if they've taken funds to produce 100 by 100, 100 by 20 wireless, we'll all know very soon if they can make good on those promises. So they'll have to show up with that and have the data to prove it. Statistical, it's very rigid that the way the FCC has defined that. So there's definitely some teeth in the legislation to force them to do it the right way. So it is a chance of partnering potential, not just the data they provide. We'll see actual data that will help support it. So there will be some help there.
Thank you.
I can tell you, MC, the company that received the largest amount of RDOF money for Champaign County will be asking, because they spoke with me about that as the task force chair, of having a proposal. I saw it in writing in front of me, of asking for support and money to go along with that. So, Mike?
The one possible downside of pursuing Connect Illinois is that that program requires a 50% match. And if we assume that the county board is going to allocate, let's say, $10 million to broadband, which is maybe not a valid assumption, but let's use that number, That only gets us a $20 million project if we do it through Connect Illinois. The federal programs are probably more like a 3-to-1 match, like 75-25 currently.
Yeah, the last NTIA, which was their broadband infrastructure program, they asked for 10%. If you put in 10%, you got 5 additional points. So you got bonus points. For Connect Illinois, they have points on the table if you're a 50-50, but you can put in lower percentages, you just don't get points. So you have to be strong in your other sections of your ask to stay in the game. I'm not saying it's not possible, it's just you get some additional points if you meet that 50-50 threshold. And actually, you can get more points if it's a 60-40, 70-30, 80-20, but it doesn't prohibit you from applying. You can absolutely apply. You just have to make good in your other sections to make up what you're not going to get in the 50-50 match points.
I mean, even for the non-RDOF areas, we may need that 10 million to leverage a local match against federal dollars, assuming we can use it, and we won't know that till we know that.
Very good points, obviously. Other questions? Yes, Sean.
Can I just note one thing? You guys talked about next steps, and I just want to kind of highlight this. What you guys have paid for with our study is the most critical piece of what going into a grant is going to need. Market research and the high-level design and the budget, that's the heavy lifting you need to move into that. And we now have it and can slice it up and dice it up any way you would want. And so I just want to note, kudos to you for being in this position. I know to any community that's able to take this step forward like this is now you're sitting in a position where you have actionable intel. I don't know if that's a good term. Sounds like a TV show type thing. But you truly do have the pieces that are the stumbling blocks for most people looking to step into grant funding. You're sitting on those. You know what your rural areas completely built out costs in today's dollars with current technology to meet good thresholds at speed and expectations. So I just want to point that out to you guys. Kudos.
So, really appreciate you guys' time, Sean and Tim. We may not be done with you, maybe for tonight, but we may not be done with you. I'm sure we'll have more questions. But here's what I'm thinking, and I'm open to any input, is in your report, and I know we're all busy, and many of us read it, maybe many of us skimmed it, but correct me if I'm wrong, Sean and Tim, the key points of your last 2 slides, the next steps and the strategic questions are on pages 13 through 20.
Yeah.
So here's what I'm thinking. We wrap this up here in a few minutes, but we go ahead and we try to meet in the next 10 days to 2 weeks to come back and really focus on pages 13 through 20. If you can do anything, read 13 through 20, because those are the 2 slides that they have that there is where the strategic questions are at and the next steps. And they're in a little bit more thorough. There's a little bit more support to it. But those are the pages to really take a look at. Not that you shouldn't read the entire report, but 13 through 20 really hammers those. And maybe at the next meeting, that's our focus. I felt tonight was great questions, great dialogue, great responses, and great input from everybody on the committee. And it was a lot about the report, which is great. But I think, again, we're back to the last 2 steps there, the next steps and the strategic questions. And that's really where we need to get to next. And I want to kind of keep the momentum rolling with this. I don't want to wait and meet in another month. I'd like to propose that in the next 10 days to 2 weeks, we try to get together again as a committee. Yes, Sean.
Yeah, one thing I would just note, and I know we had the open meeting, and so I would love to highlight that if you're able to make that meeting, per your definition, a virtual meeting, it would be very beneficial to you to have Doug Dawson right here in your midst, virtually or otherwise, and able to, he just, not that we weren't trying to pinch hit, and obviously we bring our own experience base to you, but you you paid for his expertise of doing this for decades, for hundreds and hundreds of communities just like yours, and I want you to have full access to him for whatever you could dream up. And so I would just bring that up as a potential. If we have a virtual way to bring Doug Dawson on, you'll realize why. I mean, he's kind of like drinking from a fire hose if you want to ask questions, because he's got all this in his head swimming around, probably more so than we do. So I just bring that up as a potential for you. It's
Brad,
at your disposal.
And Brad, I also built a resource that made a couple countdown clocks of the time left for ARPA and the time between now when BEAD advertises and the time when Capital Projects Fund for the state expires. So I'll send you that link, Brad. That might provide you that layer of urgency because you can see the number of days, hours, minutes, and seconds you have left to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime money, because I agree with you, Brad. I don't think it's ever going to come again, so.
To build on Sean's point, many of you on the county board are well aware of this, but maybe, sure, for Mike and I's sake, Darlene, can you clarify just for us, sort of, again, I'll call out Mike and I, how that works if we go remote, the process for that? You educated me through email when we were going about this, but maybe to refresh, and again, everybody on the county board, I'm sure, is very familiar with this, but Mike and I probably aren't.
Sure. So the rules regarding open meetings are that if you call a meeting of the board or a committee of the meeting of the board or a quorum of a majority of a quorum of a meeting of the board, you have to publish it and it has to be open to the public. And so in this group, that means there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Darlene?
So a quorum of this group would be 4, I believe.
They're not a quorum. They're not a part of this group.
This is an official committee.
But they're not.
No, you're not. You're not included.
So it's a
So
question
it just
about.
involves you guys and who you can meet with as a group. So if 4 people are together from this group with you, that requires an open meeting announcement. That's how that works. And so we have been in past doing our meetings on Zoom. We started doing in-person meetings in March. So we're now here at the board.
Darlene, maybe let me ask that question a little differently.
Sure.
Us as a committee, as a task force, agreed official task force or committee of the county board, either in person or all Zoom. But what about our guests? I think that's what Kyle's getting, since Finley and Tim and Sean and Doug are not part of the task force.
Right.
One of them can't be, like Doug can't be remote.
I've checked with the state's attorney about this when we started on the Zoom meetings, because we've tried clarifying all the ways possible that we could do this. The advice from the state's attorney in our county was that if we are in person, we're all in person. That they said to have part of the thing virtual they didn't believe that was a good idea. So, well, we have done the meetings that way. So yes, we have done all Zoom, and one of the strategies would be for the meeting to be called as a Zoom meeting, and then people can all come here to meet together on Zoom, except 1 or 2 people can be somewhere else if that's allowed. Again, we're back to there has to be specific reasons why we would call that meeting on Zoom. Right now, it's because of the pandemic, and our county has moved back to in-person meetings. So you can call those meetings for specific reasons related to the pandemic, but right now we've moved back the other way. I get it, I understand, and I've had county board members ask me, can they come, like I'm on vacation. No, that's not the reason. It'd be nice, and I think frankly the county board may change its rules at some point now that we're all familiar with more remote things. I think several of the public meetings probably will start making allowances in their rules about allowing some participation. Open Meetings Act still requires a quorum to be in the room and those kinds of things. So they'll have to talk about how they might want to do that. But for right now, that's not a possibility here.
I think that would be a great way to involve the community through Zoom. And then the fact that Mr. Dawson is out of state, we should definitely look forward or try to make that possible. I think that would be of great benefit for the community. I think on Zoom, we get a better response with participants also.
Yeah, it's not just a matter of whether people want to meet on Zoom or if it's more convenient to meet on Zoom.
Mhm.
There's specific requirements about when that's possible, and it
We
has
have to make
be.
it public. We need to make like
No,
a
I'm
public
saying how the
statement.
meetings can be called. So the Open Meetings Act requires that you can allow, the board can change and allow for a Zoom meeting or, no, I won't say Zoom, allow for some participation by persons remotely,
Mhm.
but it has to be only for reasons of it's the board themselves for reasons of health or that they're on business. So it's not just because some people can't make it to the meeting. Yeah.
Eric, last comment on this.
Yeah, just regarding that, I think that we could decide tonight to allow public participation of the Broadband Task Force to be carried out remotely, just the public participation, not the board. The board members, a quorum has to be here like we have tonight. We're all in the room. I agree with Samantha and Kyle. I think when we get to the community outreach part, we will get a huge response if the public can zoom into the meeting. I'm sure MC can work this technology out without any hitch. We're all gotten very good at dealing with people who are on a screen. And I think, the reason for this is clearly stated. Doug is in North Carolina, and we're too cheap to fly him here. And so let's have Doug be a guest at our next meeting via Zoom. And if a motion needs to be made, I would make a motion now to suspend the rules of the Broadband Task Force to allow public participation via Zoom, or also the participation of experts who cannot be here in person.
I'll second.
All right, there we go. We got 2 seconds, so that makes a third. So, but I'm not running the meeting. Brad has to call for the vote.
I'm not sure if this small group can override the Open Meetings Act, and I know this doesn't
But
constitute
Open
the county
Meetings Act
board.
is
not-
only for the
it's not-
members of the board.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not
not.
for the members of the
Honestly,
public.
we don't need to pass a rule. The Opens Meeting Act doesn't regulate public comment. It's designed to be accessible to public comment. The only thing it limits is the accessibility we have to have on our discussions as board. So we can have further conversation with the state's attorney's office, because what we're talking about doesn't really make sense.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to lay that subject aside because I refuse to spend more time tonight talking about that than our actual report. We will sort through that, and I will, as I've done in the past, I will try to share with you in the next 24, 36 hours several options for a next meeting. I will ask very quickly, is there a preference between daytime or evening?
Real quick, question for Darlene in Administrative Services. We're discussing having another meeting in 10 to 14 days. Is that something that staff-wise we can fit into this month, or, because I know in the past it's sometimes we have too many meetings.
I'll
in a
answer
month.
that
that
real
would
quick.
be a good question. So we will, again, any meeting the board does like this, we have to get a clerk and we have to get a IT person. So I'll just have to, I'll see what we can do.
And in the past, Kyle, I have coordinated with Darlene of
Yeah.
conflicts, and also this committee also, all of us remember way back, talked about trying to piggyback on nights there was existing functions, so staff wouldn't have to come in twice, if that was an option. That there's no promise that that would work every time, but that we did discuss that as a committee of meeting beforehand of another meeting or something along that line. So I will say my past work has been to talk with Darlene of such calendar and to discuss dates and things like that. Okay, anything else? Again, pages 13 through 20, please take a look at that. I'll work with Darlene on the whole Zoom thing. We will do some double checking into the issue, and hopefully in the next day or two, I'll get an email out to everyone with some options for a next meeting. We all on the same page? Then we'll move on to Chair's report, which I have none. So do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Then we're done. 8:10.